you know, one of the, as you mentioned before, Evie, one of the things I notice in this day and age is that a lot of people are starting to wake up to the phenomena, to really start seeing their own lives and take it more seriously as opposed to maybe many years ago. But I see also a lot of confusion. Some people, when they first get into this material, they think it's like science fiction or, something very bizarre, which is very outside their reality bubble, so to speak. And on that point, I also want to point out, we're going to mention a lot of things in a nutshell, basically, although it's going to be a long webinar, a lot of information, and I think I can speak for all of us. We don't expect for anyone for us to believe anything, but do your own research, right? On all our websites, we have a lot of articles and books written and a lot of resources where people can research that for themselves, right? But what it really comes down to, from a macro perspective, bigger picture perspective, is, we are in very intense times right now. I call it the time of transition. Everything is more coming up, the dark and light, everything is being more exposed. There's information overload, especially over the internet. And it's hard to discern, what is true, what is, what not. And then we're going through our own inner development and struggle and suffering to try to fit into this world, right? And like many of us on this path, we all dealt with disillusionment, and our own suffering started the quest to, seek truth, basically, right? And what I've noticed, like, as many of us, we kind of start on the 3D level of the matrix, right? Where we see that just on the basic level, the corruption of of government, religion, just basic social engineering, social conditioning, education, all of that, people just keeping us like clogs in a machine, right? And then, we see all the atrocities done by governments and what's happening in the world, all the misery, all the suffering. And a lot of activists focus on that, and they try to fight the matrix on a 3D level, right? But what's really happening, and what we're getting deeper into now, is that the 3D matrix is just really a manifestation of symptom of the hyperdimensional matrix, right? Which uses humans, their puppets, even world leaders or political figures or even secret societies and all these elements of the 3D matrix to work through for their agenda, right? And the agenda has always been to keep us in a frequency prison, on a lower form of consciousness based on ego consciousness, physical survival, and fear, right? And ultimately, we are their food source. So to bring in a nutshell, humanity is not on top of the food chain. We're literally being farmed for our frequency and energy. They're like soul eaters, light eaters. And most often they feed off of negative emotions through friction, fear, suffering, all that is initiated through interpersonal fighting or on the world's scale through wars and all of that. And that's the frequency they like. And you can go even further back. Basically, we as humanity have been taken over hundreds and thousands of years ago by unseen hyperdimensional non-physical entities who have also genetically manipulated, interfered with us, with our natural development, right? And that's a big issue because most people don't question human nature. Or we say this is just human nature, the wars and just the way we always behave. It's just the way it is, always has been. It's just ego and whatnot. But, when you really dive deeper into this topic and really like also do your own self-work, then you realize that there's something else operating, and I feel many of us who have done really also a lot of self-work and get the knowledge, we see that there's some sort of alien virus and hyperdimensional influence that really has taken this earth hostage, right? To keep it enclosed in this frequency prison. And most people are not aware of it, especially people who are not completely plugged into the matrix and don't do any self-work and just go along with the program. They may not even notice that force. Even Muraviev calls it the general law in his book Gnosis, and he writes that, as long as you go along with everybody else, the general law will ignore you because it doesn't need to intersect because you're just, the clog in the machine. You don't pose a threat. But the moment you really start to wake up, so to speak, or start to ask the question, right? or like Neo, follow the white rabbit, speak truth, do your research, start self-work, start speaking out, then you attract the attention of the hyperdimensional matrix more. And that's which ties into the topic we'll be discussing today, hyperdimensional interference and how it looks like, right? And hyperdimensional interference can happen basically on two general main points, be it through ourselves, through the predator mount thought injections, emotional manipulation, abductions, or thought injection, as I said, or all kinds of stuff where we've been triggered from within, or through others, when others who are, not on the path, not engaged in any sincere self-work, don't have that knowledge, are they being used as portals trying to get to us. And most often, or like, they target these hyperdimensional entities through ourselves or through others, our own particular blind spots, right? Our own weaknesses and blind spots and wounds, right? And it's not that obvious, these attacks, how they happen sometimes, because it's kind of like Michael Topper talked about it. Satan most often appears as angels of light, right? It can be happen through, like, you may love by may meet your soulmate, your twin flame, and all this ego flattery and great connection, or they lure you in, or we as researchers out there have been also had our experiences with other people, kind of ego pampering us and just trying to lure us in, trying to open us up, and then getting the entry and then kind of attack us that way. So I think sets the stage from the bigger picture perspective in terms of what we're dealing with, and then we can move into how this hyperdimensional interference attacks affect us personally, and how to differentiate and discern, because there are also aspects what I've noticed, a lot of people who first get into this topic or experiences put themselves into victim consciousness, because it's really important to take self-responsibility for everything, or also paranoia. Which some people, I realize, they don't actually experience these hyperdimensional interferences, but they create these thought forms because of paranoia, where these thought forms become entities and feed upon them, but they're not really like related to the hyperdimensional matrix. So that's my, intro, so to speak.